Before we start, I want to say that only 1% of you are subscribed. Please subscribe because when we reach 1,000 subscribers, I will post a special video for you. The howling wind tore across the barren landscape, whipping up a blizzard that smothered sounds and blurred visions. Ice creaked underfoot as Ethan trudged back to his outpost, his thermal suit barely fending off the biting cold. He paused, adjusting his mask and squinting through the swirling snow. A faint glimmer caught his eye, an anomaly on the endless white plain. Curiosity piqued. He ventured closer, his steps muffled by the thick snow. As he approached, the outline of a crashed spacecraft became apparent, its hull a contrast against the pristine ice. Not one of ours, Ethan muttered to himself. The design was sleek, alien, definitely not human technology. He circled the wreckage, finding it eerily silent. His heart raced. Alien encounters were not part of his geological survey mission. Peering through a breach in the hull, he spotted a figure slumped against the controls. The alien was slender, with iridescent skin that shimmered even in the dim light. Her breathing was shallow, her body language speaking of exhaustion and defeat. Ethan hesitated at the hatch. Protocol was clear about non-interference, but with the nearest human outpost miles away and a storm brewing, leaving her meant certain death. Compassion overruled protocol. He entered the wreckage, reaching out to gently shake her shoulder. "Hey, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice soft. The alien stirred, her eyes fluttering open to reveal pupils that contracted in the light. She recoiled slightly, confusion and fear evident in her gaze. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan assured, slowly removing his glove to show her his hand. Her own hand lifted slightly, hesitancy in her movement. He touched her fingers, warmth meeting cold. "You need warmth and shelter. I can help." The alien spoke, her voice a musical lilt, but the words were indecipherable. Ethan tapped his translator device, waiting for it to analyze her language. It beeped, and he tried again. "Can you understand me now?" "Yes," she replied, her voice clearer. "I am Cyril." She attempted to stand but winced in pain. "I'm Ethan." He introduced himself, supporting her gently. "Let's get you to my outpost. It's not far." With Ethan's help, Cyril exited the wreckage. The storm intensified, urging them to quicken their pace. They leaned on each other, battling the wind that threatened to sweep them off their feet. Their progress was slow, each step a testament to their urgent need for shelter. As they approached the outpost, the lights within offered a promise of safety. Ethan keyed in the code, and the door slid open with a hiss. Warm air greeted them, a stark contrast to the icy exterior. "Welcome to my humble abode," Ethan joked lightly, helping Cyril inside. He guided her to a seat, checking her over for injuries. She was stable but in shock, her body struggling with the planet's harsh environment. "Why are you here?" Ethan inquired as he prepared a warm drink for her, hoping to ease her into conversation. "I was exploring," Cyril explained, accepting the drink with a nod of gratitude. "My ship malfunctioned and I crashed. I was supposed to rendezvous with my kind, but I got lost." "You're safe here for now," Ethan reassured her. "We'll figure out a way to contact your people." Cyril looked around the small, cluttered space, taking in the human technology with an inquisitive eye. "This is different from my world," she remarked, a faint smile crossing her features. "It's warm." Ethan smiled back, settling across from her. "Let's start by you telling me more about where you come from. We have a lot to learn from each other." As the storm raged outside, the warmth of the outpost enveloped them, a fragile bond forming in the shared space between two vastly different beings thrown together by fate. Ethan busied himself in the outpost's compact kitchen, heating up a hearty stew while Cyril explored the limited space with a curious eye. The outpost, designed primarily for research and not for comfort, felt unusually lively with another presence. "So, this is a geological survey station?" Cyril asked, fingers tracing the maps and screens displaying data about the planet's surface. "Yeah, I'm here to study ice patterns and mineral deposits." "Not exactly glamorous, but important," Ethan explained, stirring the pot before glancing over at her. How about you? What brings an alien explorer to a frozen rock like this? Cyril perched on a stool, her shimmering eyes reflecting the flickering light from the monitors. I'm a cartographer. My people are mapping this quadrant. We heard stories of ancient civilizations buried under the ice. Stories of ancient civilizations, huh? Ethan chuckled as he ladled stew into 2 bowls. Sounds like we're not so different, you and I explorers at heart. They ate in companionable silence for a moment before Ethan broke the quiet. So, what happened with your ship? It malfunctioned during atmospheric entry. I'm trained in navigation, not engineering, Cyril admitted with a rueful smile. If you want, I can take a look, Ethan offered. I'm no engineer either, but 2 heads are better than 1, right? Cyril nodded, grateful. Thank you, Ethan. I'd appreciate any help. After their meal, they donned their thermal suits and made their way to the crash site. The wind had died down, and the alien craft loomed against the icy horizon, its sleek metal body stark against the snow. Inside the ship, Ethan surveyed the alien technology with awe. You'll have to walk me through what all these controls do, he said, running his hand along a panel of unfamiliar symbols. Cyril obliged, explaining the functions as best she could within the limits of the translator. Together, they pored over the engine compartment. Ethan's hands coated in grease as he followed Cyril's directions to bypass damaged circuits. As they worked, Ethan asked, "What's it like, traveling the stars?" "It's lonely sometimes," Cyril confessed. "But seeing worlds like yours, it makes it worthwhile." Ethan smiled, meeting her gaze. "It's not so bad, being stuck here with you, you know." Cyril returned his smile, a spark of something warm flickering between them. "I can say the same, Ethan." Hours passed, and though they made some progress, it was clear that the ship would need more than a quick fix. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the ice, they headed back to the outpost. Back inside, Ethan fired up the generator and soft music filled the room. "Ever heard of jazz?" he asked Cyril as he extended his hand to her. "No, what is it?" she asked, taking his hand with an intrigued expression. "It's a type of music from Earth. Just follow my lead." Ethan instructed gently as they began to sway to the smooth melody. Dancing proved to be a delightful, new experience for Cyril, and laughter echoed through the outpost, their movements awkward but joyful. As the track ended, Ethan dipped Cyril playfully, both laughing breathlessly. "Not bad for your first dance lesson, huh?" "It was exhilarating," Cyril agreed, her cheeks flushed with joy. Their shared laughter faded into a comfortable silence, filled with mutual understanding and an unspoken connection. As they prepared for the night, the isolation of the outpost seemed less daunting with someone to share it with. "Good night, Ethan," Cyril said softly as she settled into her makeshift bed. "Good night, Cyril," Ethan replied, feeling a sense of companionship he hadn't realized he'd been missing. In the quiet of the outpost, under the alien stars, the boundaries between them seemed insignificant, blurred by the music and their shared efforts to mend what was broken. The next morning, Ethan woke to find Cyril poring over the data from her damaged ship's black box, her expression one of deep concentration. He brewed some coffee, the rich aroma filling the small outpost. Morning, Ethan greeted as he handed her a steaming cup. "How's the patient doing today?" Cyril looked up, managing a smile. "Better now, thanks to this." She took a sip and grimaced slightly. "It's very robust." Ethan chuckled. "It's an acquired taste for sure." He pulled up a chair beside her. "Find anything useful in there?" "Possibly. There are some error codes I don't recognize. I'm trying to cross-reference them with our database, but the connection is spotty at best," Cyril explained, tapping at her device. "Let me see if I can boost the signal," Ethan offered, moving to adjust the outpost communication array settings. "We've got a pretty powerful setup here for Earth standards. Maybe we can push it a bit." As Ethan tweaked the settings, Cyril observed his actions with interest. "You're quite adept at this," she remarked. "I've had a lot of time to mess around with this equipment during long winter nights," Ethan admitted. "Okay, Try it now. Cyril's device beeped affirmatively, and she grinned. Got it. Thanks, Ethan. They spent the morning working together. Ethan learning more about alien technology, while Cyril seemed increasingly fascinated by human ingenuity. Between the technical work, they shared personal stories, gradually peeling back the layers of their very different lives. So, what's it like having family waiting back home? Cyril asked, her tone curious. It's bittersweet. I miss them, but the work I do here is important. It's about making sacrifices, I guess. Ethan glanced at her. What about you? Anyone waiting for your return? Cyril paused, her eyes distant. My people don't form attachments like humans do. We are more communal. But yes, there are those who will expect my safe return. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden alarm from Cyril's device. What's that? Ethan asked, concerned. It's a proximity alert. Something's approaching the outpost, Cyril said, standing to look out the window. Ethan joined her, peering into the icy mist. A dark shape loomed, growing larger. It's a vehicle, he said, squinting against the glare. Looks like one of ours. A snow rover came into view, its lights cutting through the fog. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. It's probably just a supply drop. We weren't expecting one so soon, but weather changes plans out here. They watched as the rover parked beside the outpost, and a figure clad in a thermal suit disembarked, waving at them. Ethan waved back, then turned to Cyril. Come on, let's introduce you to some real human hospitality. Outside, they greeted the newcomer, a fellow researcher named Javier. After the initial surprise of seeing Cyril, Javier welcomed her warmly. Any friend of Ethan's is a friend of ours. Inside, over hot drinks and the fresh supplies Javier had brought, the atmosphere grew lively. Javier was full of stories from other outposts, and his easy charm won Cyril over. They shared a hearty meal, Ethan and Javier regaling Cyril with tales of human exploits and mishaps. As the evening wound down, Javier prepared to leave, promising to spread the word about their extra guest in a way that wouldn't alarm the higher-ups. Take care of our new friend, he told Ethan, clapping him on the back. Will do, Ethan assured him, feeling a protective warmth for Cyril. Back inside, as they cleaned up, Cyril seemed thoughtful. Humans are more welcoming than I expected, she admitted. We're not so bad. Once you get to know us, Ethan replied with a smile. Same could be said for you folks, too. As they settled down for the night, the outpost felt cozier, the alien stars outside not so menacing. In the shared silence, a bond of mutual respect and understanding had formed, the beginnings of a friendship that spanned galaxies. The morning light spilled softly into the outpost, reflecting off the ice outside and casting a serene glow. Ethan was already up, adjusting some of the equipment in the lab when Cyril emerged from her makeshift quarters. Good morning, Ethan greeted without turning. He was tinkering with a device that looked half disassembled. Thought I'd try to improve our communication setup. Maybe cut down on those translation delays. Cyril approached, her interest piqued. Can I help? Sure, Ethan said, passing her a tool. Hold this, and tell me if you see any green lights blink. They worked in tandem, with Cyril quickly picking up on Ethan's instructions. The task gave them a rhythm, a kind of unspoken understanding that transcended the need for words. Ethan, Cyril started, pausing in her work. Back home, this sort of teamwork isn't common. We're more individual in our tasks. Ethan looked up, a small smile playing on his lips. Well, around here, we have to rely on each other a lot, especially in these remote locations. It builds camaraderie. Camaraderie, Cyril repeated, rolling the unfamiliar word around. I like that. With the communication enhancer tweaked, Ethan proposed a new exercise. How about we try something fun? Let's teach each other something from our cultures. I could show you some basic human expressions, and maybe you can teach me some from your world. Cyril agreed eagerly, and they spent the next hour exchanging phrases and gestures, laughter echoing through the station as they attempted to mimic each other. Ethan taught Cyril how to high-five, and in return, Cyril showed him a traditional greeting from her planet, a complicated series of hand movements that Ethan struggled to replicate. Humans use a lot of facial expressions too. Ethan explained as he demonstrated different emotions: happiness, sadness, surprise. What about your people? We rely more on vocal inflections and posture, Cyril explained, demonstrating a subtle tilting of her head that conveyed respect. Their lessons were interrupted by a beep from one of the outpost monitors, a reminder of the day's research tasks. Ethan checked the readings. Looks like we've got a good window to collect some ice core samples. Want to come with me? It's pretty routine, but you might find it interesting. Sarah was keen to learn more about Ethan's work, so they donned their thermal gear and ventured out into the icy expanse. Ethan showed her how to use the coring device, explaining the importance of the samples in understanding the planet's climate history. As Cyril took her turn with the drill, Ethan observed, "You're a natural at this. It's similar to some of our survey tools," Cyril said, pleased with the comparison. "I see now how our fields overlap. Even if our worlds are very different, their shared task done, they return to the outpost, their bond deepened by the day's experiences." Back inside, they removed their heavy gear, and Ethan checked the cores they had extracted. "These will tell us a lot about the past climate of this planet," Ethan noted, placing the samples carefully in storage. "Maybe help us predict future patterns." Cyril watched, fascinated. "And perhaps how to survive it," she added, linking their work back to her own planet's challenges. "Yes, exactly," Ethan agreed, impressed by her insight. "Survival, understanding, adapting. It's what all beings have in common, isn't it?" As they settled in for the evening, their conversation turned to the stars, the vast unknown that was both her home and his frontier. They discussed constellations, those known to Earth and those Cyril grew up with. "I'll show you the Southern Cross tonight," Ethan promised as twilight deepened outside. "It's one of my favorites. And I'll show you the Navigator's cluster from my sky," Cyril countered with a smile. That night, under the shared sky, they traced the stars of their different worlds, each constellation a story, each story a bridge drawing them closer across the vastness of space. A blizzard had been gathering strength since the early hours, and by midday, it enveloped the outpost in a curtain of white. Inside, the storm's howl was a constant drone, a reminder of the planet's indifference to its transient inhabitants. Ethan and Cyril sat side by side, monitoring the worsening conditions through the station's sensors. "Looks like we're not going anywhere for a while," Ethan remarked, checking the readings. Cyril nodded, her eyes reflecting the storm's ferocity as she watched the wind whip the snow into violent swirls. "Is it often this intense?" she asked. "It can be, but we're safe here. The outpost is designed to withstand much worse," Ethan reassured her. He moved away from the window to start a fire in the small hearth, an addition he'd made for occasions just like this. "Heat's going to be our best friend today." As the fire crackled to life, the warmth spread, a stark contrast to the cold fury outside. Ethan suggested a way to pass the time. "How about a game? Do you have games where you come from?" Cyril smiled, intrigued. "We do, though I suspect they're quite different from yours." Ethan rummaged through a cupboard and pulled out a couple of board games. "Ever played chess?" "No, but I'm willing to learn," Cyril responded, her interest piqued as she watched Ethan set up the board. The next few hours were spent in quiet concentration and bursts of laughter as Ethan explained the rules and Cyril quickly grasped the strategies. The game provided a comfortable routine, and as they played, they occasionally glanced outside, where the storm raged unabated. After a particularly spirited game, they took a break, sipping hot tea as the room grew dim with the evening's approach. The storm seemed to press closer, the sounds louder against the outpost walls. "It's like the storm wants to come in," Cyril observed, her voice a mix of awe and apprehension. "It does seem that way, doesn't it?" Ethan agreed. He moved to sit closer to her, instinctively wanting to comfort her. "But it won't get in. We're safe here together." Cyril looked at him, her expression softening. I'm glad I'm not alone, she admitted. It's comforting, having someone else here. Ethan felt a warm surge of protectiveness. I feel the same, he confessed. It's nice to have company, especially during a storm like this. The wind howled louder, as if in response to their shared sentiment, making the outpost creak. Cyril moved closer to the fire, visibly relaxed in its glow. Ethan watched her, appreciating the way she seemed to blend into the fabric of his daily life, no longer just a visitor but a companion. Tell me about your family, Cyril suddenly asked, her eyes curious. Ethan leaned back, the images of his loved ones clear in his mind. I have a brother and a sister, both back on Earth. We're pretty close. I miss them a lot out here, and they must miss you, Cyril added softly. They do. We keep in touch through messages, but it's not the same as being there. Ethan paused, then turned the conversation back to her. What about you? What's it like being connected to everyone in your community? It's complex. We're independent, but always part of a collective consciousness. It's hard to feel lonely, but it's also hard to be truly alone, Cyril explained, her voice tinged with a mix of fondness and frustration. As they shared more about their lives, the storm outside seemed less threatening, the howl of the wind blending into the background of their conversation. The fire's warmth and the stories they exchanged filled the outpost with an ambience of coziness and shared human and alien experience. Thank you, Ethan, for making this storm feel less fierce, Cyril said as they prepared to retire for the night. Ethan smiled, placing another log on the fire. Any time, Cyril. We'll weather it together. As they settled down, the storm continued its symphony outside, but inside, the outpost was calm, the firelight casting dancing shadows over two figures drawn together by circumstance, yet bound by something increasingly profound. The storm had finally abated by morning, leaving a serene silence that blanketed the outpost. Inside, Ethan and Cyril started the day with a quiet breakfast, the previous night's bonding leaving a comfortable familiarity between them. I've never seen so much snow in my life, Cyril commented, looking out at the fresh blanket of white that covered everything. It's beautiful in a daunting way. Ethan nodded, pouring them both some coffee. It's the kind of beauty that's best appreciated from behind a window with a hot drink in hand. They laughed, and after cleaning up, Ethan suggested a walk outside to assess the aftermath of the storm and check on the equipment, bundled up in their thermal gear. They stepped out into the crisp morning air, the snow crunching under their feet. As they walked, Ethan pointed out various features of the landscape, now altered by the snowdrifts. See over there? That ridge wasn't visible before. The storms changed the whole topology of the area. Cyril listened intently, then shared her observations from a cartographer's point of view. It's fascinating how dynamic a planet can be. On my world, the changes are much slower, almost imperceptible. Their walk took them around the outpost, where they checked sensors and equipment, making adjustments where necessary. Working together seamlessly, they managed to restore a weather beacon that had been buried under the snow. Thanks for the help, Ethan said as they headed back. It would have taken me twice as long to dig that out by myself. Cyril smiled. I'm glad to be useful. It feels good, working together like this. Back inside, they shed their heavy coats and settled by the window with hot tea, watching as the sun began its slow descent. The conversation turned to more personal topics, their mutual curiosity about each other's worlds growing deeper. Ethan, Cyril began hesitantly, what is it like to feel human emotion so strongly? On my planet, emotions are moderated by the collective. What I've felt here with you, it's different. Ethan considered her question, trying to articulate feelings he'd always taken for granted. It's like color, vivid and varying. Each emotion has its own hue and intensity. Being with you, I felt colors I didn't know existed. Cyril reflected on his words, her expression thoughtful. I think I'm beginning to understand that. Since the crash, everything has been so intense. Fear, relief, happiness. Now this warmth. That warmth, Ethan said slowly. Do you think it could be something more? Something like affection or even love. Cyril met his gaze, her eyes luminous. I think it might be. The air between them felt charged as Ethan reached across the small space separating them, taking her hand. Cyril's hand was cool in his, and he gently warmed it between his palms. "Your hands are always so warm," Cyril murmured, a smile playing on her lips. "It's not just my hands," Ethan replied softly. "It's being with you. You bring warmth I didn't know I was missing." Their conversation drifted into a comfortable silence, each lost in the new emotions stirring within. Eventually, Ethan stood, offering his hand to Cyril. "Come with me." He led her to his work area, where he'd been assembling a model of the solar system for educational outreach. "I want to show you something." Together, they assembled the model, Ethan explaining the solar system, while Cyril compared it to her own celestial knowledge. The activity was simple yet intimate, each gesture and word weaving them closer together. As they placed a final piece, Ethan turned to Cyril, his heart beating faster. "Being here with you, doing this, it feels right, like discovering a new star in a familiar constellation." Cyril nodded, her eyes shining with unspoken feelings. "Yes, Ethan, it feels right to me too." In the quiet of the outpost, under the faint glow of the aurora outside, Ethan and Cyril embraced, the warmth between them a silent testament to the bond they had formed, a bond as mysterious and profound as the universe itself. The crisp, clear morning following their heartfelt revelation found Ethan and Cyril venturing outside with a new purpose. The emotional ground they had covered together now lay as a foundation for a deeper exploration, not just of the planet, but of each other's cultures and histories. "Let's head to the northern ridge today," Ethan suggested, handing Cyril a thermal mug filled with steaming coffee. "The view from there is spectacular, and I think you'll find the geological formations interesting." Cyril accepted the mug, her fingers brushing against his in a moment of warm contact. "I'd like that," she replied, her voice soft yet eager. As they trudged through the snow, the landscape bathed in the light of a rising sun, Ethan pointed out various natural features, explaining their significance and the processes that formed them. Cyril listened intently, asking insightful questions that reflected her deep understanding of physical geography. When they reached the ridge, the view opened up. A vast expanse of ice and rock stretched out before them, the horizon a line of shimmering light. "It's beautiful," Cyril murmured, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's one of my favorite spots," Ethan admitted, watching her reaction with a sense of pride. "It always reminds me of how small we are in the grand scheme of things." Cyril nodded in agreement. Yet, here we are, two beings from different corners of the galaxy, sharing this moment. It's humbling. They set up some equipment to monitor environmental data, a routine task for Ethan, but now shared with Cyril, it took on a new dimension. They worked in sync, each movement a dance they had come to master together. As they worked, Cyril began to share more about her people's history and culture, her voice animated. "Our society values the collective knowledge, the sum of our experiences. It's why we explore, to add to that collective and grow." Ethan listened, fascinated. Humans value individuality a bit more, I think. We cherish personal achievements, personal journeys. But there's something to be said for your way of seeing things. The balance between the individual and the collective is delicate, Cyril reflected. "I've learned that more keenly since meeting you." Their conversation drifted to the topic of ancient civilizations, sparked by the geological features around them that hinted at past cataclysms. "There are legends of an advanced civilization that once thrived here," Ethan shared, showing her a fossilized artifact he had found on a previous expedition. Cyril examined it with expert eyes. "My people have similar legends, worlds that rose and fell, leaving behind remnants for us to find and ponder." Their day passed in a blend of scientific work and deep conversation. As they packed up to return to the outpost, Ethan glanced at Cyril, struck by the ease of their companionship. "I've never shared so much of my work with anyone before, not like this." Cyril smiled warmly. Nor have I. It's been enlightening, Ethan. I feel a part of your world now, not just a visitor. Back at the outpost, they prepared a simple meal together, their movements around the kitchen comfortable and familiar. The evening stretched before them, filled with possibilities. As they ate, Ethan broached a subject that had been on his mind. Cyril, once your people come to retrieve you, what happens then? Do you think they'll let you return here? Cyril paused, her utensil halfway to her mouth. I don't know, she admitted after a moment. It's complicated, but I know one thing for certain. I don't want to forget this. Any of this. Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand. Then we make the most of now, and maybe find a way to keep making moments like these. Their meal ended with plans to document their findings and experiences, perhaps as a way to bridge their two worlds. They settled into their evening with laptops and notes, the digital glow of their screens casting a soft light around them, a light not of stars, but of shared human and alien endeavor. In the silence that surrounded them, filled only with the soft tapping of keys, the promise of understanding and perhaps a lasting connection hung quietly in the air, as tangible and comforting as the warmth of the fire that crackled nearby. The day Cyril's people were expected to arrive dawned clear and cold. Both Ethan and Cyril were up early, a sense of nervous anticipation hanging in the air between them. They had decided to spend the morning as usual, not speaking much about the looming farewell, but focusing on their shared tasks around the outpost. As they calibrated some of the sensors outside, Ethan broke the silence, his voice steady but his hands betraying a slight tremor. You know, I never thought I'd meet someone like you when I signed up for the stint. Cyril looked up from the sensor panel, her eyes meeting his. Neither did I. I came here seeking knowledge from my people, but I found so much more. They worked in silence for a few moments before Cyril added, Ethan, whatever happens today, I want you to know that these have been some of the most meaningful days of my existence. Ethan stopped what he was doing, took off his gloves, and faced her. Cyril, I feel the same. You've changed the way I see the universe. It's bigger, more interconnected. As they returned to the warmth of the outpost, a signal beeped from the communication console interrupted their quiet camaraderie. Cyril moved to answer it, her movements hesitant. The console screen lit up, displaying a message in her people's script. After reading it, she turned to Ethan, her expression complex. They are in orbit, preparing to land soon, she announced, her voice faltering slightly. Ethan nodded, trying to mask his disappointment. I guess we should get ready to meet them. Together, they prepared a small welcome area outside the outpost. Ethan set up chairs and laid out some of the human food items he thought might be palatable to her people. Cyril arranged some of her belongings, items she had brought with her that she would now take back. As they worked, Ethan asked, Will you tell them about us? About what we learned from each other? I will. I'll tell them everything. They should know how valuable this has been, and not just scientifically. Cyril's voice was firm, her decision clear. The ground outside the outpost began to tremble slightly as her people's ship descended. It was sleek and silent, unlike the noisy craft used by humans. As it landed, Ethan and Cyril stepped back, watching as the hatch opened and several of her kind disembarked. They were tall and moved with graceful precision, their eyes taking in the surroundings and then settling on Cyril with expressions of relief and affection. One of them, clearly a leader, approached Cyril, and they exchanged a few quiet words. Then, the leader turned to Ethan, extending a hand in a surprisingly human gesture. We are in your debt, Ethan of Earth. Our sister speaks highly of your kindness and collaboration. Ethan shook the offered hand, feeling a surge of pride and sadness. It was my honor. She taught me just as much. The leader nodded, then signaled to the others. Brief formalities followed, with gifts exchanged, a collection of minerals and ice samples from Ethan and from Cyril's people, a beautifully crafted instrument for measuring atmospheric anomalies. As the time for departure grew near, Ethan and Cyril found themselves standing slightly apart from the others, sharing a quiet farewell. I'll never forget you, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. And I you, Sarah replied, her voice steady but her eyes shining with unshed tears. You've warmed me more than your son ever could. With a final embrace, they parted, Sarah joining her people. Ethan stood by the outpost, watching as the alien craft lifted off, taking a piece of his heart with it. He whispered into the wind, a promise to himself and a wish for her. Maybe one day, our paths will cross again under the same stars. Back inside the now quiet outpost, Ethan looked around at the space that had been filled with laughter, conversation, and discovery. It felt empty, but beneath that, there was a warmth, a memory of shared moments that would endure, a reminder that even across the vast cosmos, connections could be made and cherished. He smiled softly, grateful for the unexpected journey that had changed everything.